with Iowa's quarterback room seemingly intact and remaining constant, we take a look at the numbers. Is the narrative around Spencer Petras accurate? Is the narrative around Alex Padilla accurate? And should Iowa fans have faith in the quarterback room moving forward into the 2022 season? More on that in a moment. Before we get to our video for today, a reminder, if you've not already subscribed, please help us out and subscribe to this channel from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Like this video as well. But man, if you can subscribe, that would really help us out. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and you've helped us out immensely by helping us over at the Iowa, the Voice of College Football channel. So please subscribe here if you have not already done so. So the report just a couple weeks ago from Chad Leistico of the Des Moines Register is that Alex Padilla is returning. Leistico reporting that he had a conversation with his father and that it sounds like he is coming back for spring practice. Now, you take that with a grain of salt. You understand in the era of the transfer portal, things can change, and things can change in a hurry. We've seen kids across the country enter their name in the transfer portal, take it out of the transfer portal, and then go right back into the transfer portal. You got to remember, these are 18 to 23-year-old kids, and decision-making may not be, cut and dry. So we'll wait on that. Certainly, if Spencer Petras appears to be the guy that Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz, Ken O'Keefe, that they like the most heading out of spring, don't be surprised to see Alex Padilla enter the transfer portal. Just because he's not entering it now doesn't mean he'll be on the roster this fall, okay? Now, the question is, would Iowa have a shot at a transfer portal quarterback after spring practice? Would Iowa pursue one if Alex Padilla left? I think those are all valid questions. But for now, the quarterback room remains intact. So is the narrative around Spencer Petras and is the narrative around Alex Padilla, are those narratives accurate? Many Iowa fans not high on Spencer Petras, to say the least. So let's take a look at the numbers, first of all, for Spencer. And let's just see, did significant improvement show up, at least in the stat sheet, so to speak? Let's take a look, first of all, at Spencer Petras for the year 2020. You'll see here, and I'm grabbing this from sportsreference.com, which, by the way, they do a tremendous job tracking all this information. But you see here 2020, and you'll see Spencer Petras, 8 games in 2020. Of course, he started in every one. Iowa went 6-2. 140 out of 240 attempts for 57.1% pass completion percentage. Threw for just under 1,600 yards, about 6.4 yards per attempt. All right, 9-5 touchdown to interception ratio, and all that evens out to be a 119 passer rating, also known as passing efficiency. 2021, was there a major jump for Spencer Petras? So 12 games played. Of course, again, that has to be put into context. He played just one drive against Northwestern, okay, and he was pulled from that game, so you could say that's 11 games played. He played just half of the Nebraska game, so those are all notes to be made, and of course he didn't play against Illinois or Minnesota. But Spencer Petras, 12 total games, ended up throwing for 57%, just over 57% completion percentage, so virtually the same as what he threw in 2020. Just over 1,800 yards, but certainly in more games played in 21. Yards per attempt, basically the same, 6.5 yards per attempt for Spencer. The touchdown-interception ratio actually went down. So 10 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. And again, those 10 touchdowns came in, you could argue, 11 games. I know you see the number 12 there, but 11 games for Spencer Petras. And again, Nebraska game, I understand he played half of it, and so forth. And you could say the same thing about Michigan, right? He didn't finish that game either. But the point is, 10-9 interception or touchdown to interception ratio, passer rating of 117. So actually, passer rating went down. Passer rating went down overall. And again, we also have to keep in mind that Iowa played a non-conference schedule this year. Now, I know they went 2 Ames and played Iowa State, but they also played the likes of Colorado State and Kent State, which would tell you that would at least be an opportunity to pad these stats, you would think, because in 2020, Iowa did not play a non-conference schedule, right? They went right into Big Ten play. Spencer Petras had no game experience under his belt. So one would think that the addition of Kent State and Colorado State would assist in these numbers? Well, it didn't exactly translate into Spencer Petras' 21 numbers. So 117.3 for his passer rating. Now let's compare this to the rest of the Big Ten Conference, because we've talked about the national stats, and we can go over those stats, but it needs to be noted that the majority of Iowa's schedule, year in and year out, is against Big Ten competition, so it would make sense to compare Spencer Petras' numbers against other quarterbacks in the Big Ten Conference. So let's take a look at passing numbers, and I'm getting this from the Big Ten website, big10.org. So we start out at the top, of course. C.J. Stroud had an excellent year. I think most would probably agree he was the best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. 186.6 passing efficiency, or again, passer rating, if you want to call it that. Aiden O'Connell, Talia Tagovailoa, of course, Adrian Martinez, top 4, kind of underrated. Peyton Thorne, Cade McNamara from Michigan, Sean Clifford, Tanner Morgan, Graham Mertz, Brandon Peters, and there's Spencer Petras. So Spencer Petras, and I know if you look up and down this list, you'll see the one team that's missing a quarterback or does not have a quarterback that is representing the school is Indiana. And, of course, Indiana had juggle quarterbacks this year, had an awful year, and all 3 quarterbacks struggled when they did play, whether that be Penix or Tuttle. They struggled. So you could say Indiana's quarterbacks as a whole were number 14 on this list, but regardless, Spencer Petras, number 11, and the only quarterbacks below him as far as regular starters in the Big Ten this year, and I'm talking about guys, again, who played 9 or more games, would have been Noah Vedral and then Ryan Helinski. So Rutgers and Northwestern. Brandon Peters ahead of Iowa, ahead of Spencer Petras specifically. And, of course, you see Graham Mertz, who has not lived up to the expectation of his 5-star status heading into college. So that's passer efficiency. What about passing yards? Now, I know you certainly have to take this with a grain of salt. I understand Iowa runs the ball a lot. Spencer Petras ranks 9th among passing leaders in the Big Ten, ahead of the likes of Mertz, Brandon Peters, and not far behind Tanner Morgan. But let's keep this in mind, folks, that when you look at Wisconsin, Minnesota, and even Illinois, those are 3 teams that have ran the ball very well consistently. So the question we have to ask is, did Iowa run the ball consistently well? Well, let's take a look at the rushing numbers. Rushing offense in the Big Ten, Iowa ranks 11th out of 14 teams. They average 123.6 yards per game. As far as average, Iowa also in 11th place out of 14 teams. Of course, Purdue went pass-heavy, was very successful with their pass-heavy offense. Penn State surprisingly low on the list. Indiana behind Iowa, and then, of course, Rutgers right ahead of Iowa, along with Northwestern, Maryland, and so forth. But Iowa averaging just 3.4 yards per carry on the ground. So we can't look at those passing numbers for the likes of Graham Mertz, Tanner Morgan, or even Brandon Peters in the same light as we look at Spencer Petras' numbers, because Spencer did not have a running game that he relied on primarily, specifically for yardage. So it's not like, again, Iowa had to pass the ball quite a bit, and that would be reflected if you take a look here at the attempts. You see that Spencer Petras just 9th in attempts, but certainly ahead of Mertz, Morgan, and Peters. So that is some context here when we look at the total yardage numbers for the year 2021. Touchdowns. Look at touchdowns here as well. We can do that while we're on this page. Spencer Petras, actually not as low as I anticipated here. 8th in the conference with 10 touchdowns. Interceptions. Did a fairly good job protecting the football, as one would expect. 9 interceptions, but certainly nothing that jumps off the page at you. But again, Spencer Petras certainly protected the football fairly well, although got in trouble against Kentucky, Michigan, and against Purdue and Wisconsin. Okay, let's take a look at Alex Padilla, because I know Alex Padilla did not play nearly as much as Spencer Petras did. We see we'll see, according to sportsreference.com, Alex played in 8 games. But again, some context, the only games where Alex Padilla played a lot would have been against Northwestern when he came in early in relief of Spencer Petras. He played, of course, the entire game against Illinois, played the entire game against Minnesota, and played 1/2 against Nebraska. He also played late in the game, about a 1/4 against Michigan in the Big Ten championship game. So I guess we can weigh that as well. But looking at total numbers for Alex Padilla, His completion percentage was actually below 50%, 49.1% completion percentage for just under 600, or just over 600 yards, 5.7 yards per attempt, and boy, passer rating of 99.1, touchdown interception ratio of 2-2. So, is the narrative about Alex Padilla being a lot more mobile than Spencer Petras, is that accurate? I think the eye test would tell you that it is. However, if you look at rushing numbers, Alex Padilla still ran for negative 25 yards. And in college, of course, sack yardage is added onto this. So that should be taken into account. You look over at Spencer Petras and his rushing numbers, he actually ran for negative 109. So again, looking at the fact that Spencer Petras played, you could argue, in 3 times as many games as Alex Padilla, these numbers really aren't that different. Alex Padilla certainly took less sacks per snap. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I think that's safe to say that he was more evasive in the pocket. So the question is, should Iowa fans have confidence right now in the quarterback room? I've had people state that the reason that they're confident in Spencer Petras and the room moving forward is partially because of who is coaching Spencer Petras. And I'm not talking about Ken O'Keefe, but of course, as many of you know, Spencer Petras, during the offseason, receives private training from a guy named Tony Racioppi, who's a quarterbacks coach out on the East Coast. And I know his background. He, of course, coached Nate Stanley. I believe he still works with Nate, last I heard. He's also credited for helping Kenny Pickett. And that's kind of the one example that people like to use as to why we should have confidence in Spencer Petras making a jump still, is because of what Tony Racioppi was able to accomplish with Kenny Pickett. Now the question is, do you give Tony Racioppi the primary credit for the evolution of a guy who's now going to be a first-round draft pick and was a Heisman finalist in Kenny Pickett? Well, one thing to keep in mind about Kenny Pickett is Kenny Pickett's quarterbacks coach at Pittsburgh was a guy named Mark Whipple, who's also credited for helping Ben Roethlisberger in the NFL early in Big Ben's career. And I'm not saying Tony Racioppi hasn't helped Kenny Pickett, but we know there are other variables at play. Tony Racioppi is not working with Kenny month in and month out, just like Tony Racioppi is not working with Spencer Petras month in and month out. Now, if you look at Kenny Pickett's numbers, he did make a huge jump in 2021. Now, Kenny Pickett did not make a big jump between 2019 and 2020. You'll see here his numbers. Threw for just over 3,000 yards in 19. Now, he played in less games. It played in 12 total games, but threw for 61.6% completion percentage, 61.1% in 2020. So you could say he kind of plateaued until 2021 when those numbers all shot way, way up. Although passer rating between 19 and 20 did improve overall. So, the question is, should Iowa fans be confident that there's going to be a big jump between this year and next? I have no reason to think that there will be a big jump, okay? And I'm not here to rip Alex Padilla or Spencer Petras, but have we seen, and this is a conversation we can have on a future video, but have we seen Iowa quarterbacks really make big jumps between one year to the next? I don't think that the numbers bear that out. Again, that will be a project for a different video. Certainly, we had a caller the other day on one of our shows bring up the fact that it seems like Iowa has its best offensive years in year one of a new quarterback era. Nate Stanley in 2017, C.J. Beathard in 2015, and you could argue Stanzi in 2009, although I know he played part of 2008. And I think there's some substance to that. And is that because Iowa is kind of molding the quarterback over time to be less risk-taking and be more conservative? That's a possibility. I'm just not sure at this point if you can really point to what Tony Racioppi did with Kenny Pickett and assume that just means this is what's going to happen with Spencer Petras. I certainly think Kenny Pickett has some intangibles that Spencer just doesn't have, like it or not. And as far as Alex Padilla is concerned, the mobility is something that Iowa has to work with, but there's no guarantee he's here this fall. I'm still standing by that. I don't think there's any guarantee of that. Now, I'm sure Kirk Ferentz, I would be shocked if Kirk Ferentz made it clear after the spring that Spencer Petras is their guy, because they want both of these guys. You don't want to head into the spring with just one guy with game experience being Spencer Petras, who has struggled. But again, The word from the Des Moines Register is that both guys are returning this spring, which is good news. It's good news. At this point, I don't have any reason to think either guy will make a huge jump forward, but that's also, we're not putting pressure on Tony Racioppi. The pressure is on Ken O'Keefe, Brian Ferentz, and Kirk Ferentz to better quarterback play. Those are the guys that are making, Brian Ferentz and Ken O'Keefe combined make over $1,500, $1,500. Wouldn't that be something? $1,500 a month? No, they make well over $1.5 million a year combined. So those guys certainly have to play the largest role in Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla's development during this offseason, and all you can do if you're an Iowa fan is hope that happens. Appreciate you listening to the video this afternoon. Hope you enjoyed the content. Again, a reminder to subscribe if you have not already done so. We'll continue to post content throughout the offseason on Iowa football and, of course, Iowa hoops.